It's great to have all of you here tonight, and I don't think that Bob needs a great deal of introduction, but I do have a lot of it. And I'm going to use it because Bob wrote this and I think it's really good. I'd like to see it. Well, why wouldn't it be good? Well done. A special thank you, by the way, to the AIHPC for sponsoring this presentation. And there are many, 20 plus presentations throughout these last years. They've been a great gift, a tremendous gift to the community and to this region. So the AIHPC, and Bob has been obviously a part of that for all of that time. Bob is obviously a lifelong resident of Bayfield, and many of you, how many of you knew his father? Most of you?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, what a treat, and I swear there's a clone that there, I think at night they commune through the stars. I think because it's all coming out in Bob, and I just see his father in him so much. I love it dearly. One of my all-time favorite people, his father. Associated with the Bayfield Heritage Association, many years, of course. The Bayfield Maritime Museum, and the Apostle Islands Historic Preservation Conservancy, the AIHPC. Bob hails from a commercial fishing family, and he has, of course, fished commercially, worked with the WDNR, sport fishes the great waters, and is a lifelong Rocky Islander. That's a great island. He is at best but an amateur, he says, history detective, and joyfully relates stories of the history of old times gone by. Bob is also a folk artist, not a professional who makes a living at the challenge, but just an average Joe who at age 67 started to play with pen and ink, acrylic and oil paints. His paintings reflect his love and passion for the vessels that tied lines to the harbor city, port of entry, the tie posts over rides of many storms from the Grand Lady Lake Superior. His portraits of boats, tugs, and ships each signal a short story about the vessel. The exhibit contains 32 of his paintings that have additional ship official records and documentation histories. Some stories are glad, and some are sad. All are historically accurate, and all are centered exclusively around boats and ships that were historically all Bayfield, quote unquote, or those that just tied to the docks and sailed forward from this port of entry. BHA and Bob, hope you enjoy the slideshow and exhibit unveiling, the fellowship that follows, and your evening here. Here's Bob!
I have to say, there's no better MC than this guy in this work. Jerry Phillips is like the king of swing there. He can tell a story that makes the people happy and make the sad people cry. So he's one of the best in the business. And I thank Jerry, and I want to start off by just thanking Jerry and thanking the crew that helped me put this together. I did the paintings and I did the research on the boats. But I want to thank Marty Peterson and Marilyn Van Sant and a number of other people in this organization that really make this place go. So give them a nice little hand for the good work. So anyway, I want to tell you a little bit more about the Conservancy. Just a second. We started out in 2006 with the idea that we were going to be a part of saving and preserving the history of this area in the Apostle Islands. And then we ventured to the left and to the right, and now we're helping out different organizations like churches and historic societies and VHA and things like that. So we're heavily vested in, spreading and sharing the history of this area and this great Apostle Island region. So the Conservancy's been around since 2006. and we're moving forward, and I feel we're going to be pretty nice, a pretty good contributor here and in other endeavors in the area for quite some time. So I'm feeling really good about that. Okay? So who am I really? I'm not a painter. I'm not an artist. I'm not really a historian. I'm just a kid that's coming in from Rocky Island on his dad's boat, circa 1962. So you see that little rugrat in the bow there? That'd be me. And that's what started my whole thing about the history of the area, the boats of this area, the maritime area, the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, which is a huge and wonderful investment in this part of the world. But anyway, I wanted to take you there a little bit and tell you a little bit about who I really am. I am that kid on the bottom of that boat. That's at the old Booth Fisheries Dock in downtown Bayfield, right now, where the Apostle Islands or the Madeline Island Ferry Line ties their rigs every day. So that's the way it was in 1959. But I thought that I would align this definition with one of my paintings, and I'll talk a little bit about the painting, and then move on, and move on, and move on, and we should finish up here fairly quickly. So anyway, it's Schooner. Basically, you can all read that, and my rendition of it is, here's a painting I did of the Alice Craig. She was a schooner that came to Bayfield in 1870 with the famous Bataan family of Bayfield, Wisconsin. And she was formerly named John B. Floyd. She was a revenue cutter for the United States government, built in 1859. Okay, so I thought this story is kind of interesting because she was a freighter. She picked up fish in the islands, and she went between here and Duluth. And when she got to Duluth, she came home one day, and Nelson Bataan was on her, and he got to a fair wind on the way down, but by the time he got to Sand Island, one of the apostles way out there, it started blowing hard northeast, and it got cold, and then it went northwest, started to freeze, and he turned her around, and he went into Bark Bay, which is near Herbster, Wisconsin. And he froze her in there in the wintertime. She froze in the ice in the winter, and he said, the heck with it. I'm leaving her there, and that crew of 9 people that were on her walked back to Bayfield that winter from Herbster. They went back the next spring and picked up where I was, and then they sailed her back to Bayfield. So there, I just had to do a winter scene of the Alice Craig. She's a gaff-rigged, 2-masted schooner, and a former revenue cutter. Okay? Any questions about her? Good. Steamship. The Lighthouse tenders, they were numerous in the area. The one that I'm going to show you was here from 1872 to 1876, and her name was the Dahlia. That's a picture of, that's her, in my interpretation. You know what folk art is? It's just basically what you think you see in your own mind. You lay it down on a sheet of paper and paint it in like that. But that, to me, that's the Dahlia leaving Oliver Island. That's the lighthouse at Oliver Island, and she's on her way steaming over to fill the lighthouse at Devil's Island. So, in my mind, that's the Dahlia. And all this information I'm telling you right now, when you take a walk through at the end of this exposition tonight, you'll go into the room, the gallery where it's at, and you'll see the Dahlia's photo there. Right next to it is a really nice history of each and every boat that I painted. So I'm thinking you can be part of a team here that enjoys maybe some folk art and an educational experience. So you'll see the Dahlia there. That's what she looked like in real life. I snatched that photo from C. Patrick Lavity, who is one of the geniuses in the categorization of ships on the Great Lakes. Next up, steamships, active freighters. This is referred to as a steamer. This vessel was propelled by one or more steam engines. You don't see too many of those bad girls around this area anymore. They were a triple expansion and just singular, steam engines fired by coal and by wood in the islands here. So at Oak Island, they had a spot where they stopped there in about 1870. William Knight was there, and they threw on the oak logs there, and they, fill their boats full of those oak logs, and then move on up and down the lake. With the expansion of bituminous coal about a year later, that industry on Oak Island went kaput, and that was the end of that. And all these steamers then were driven with coal. So anyway, that's my interpretation. It's called the Gale, November 18, 1883. That particular boat, as you can see, the Manistee. She came to Bayfield every year, 3 or 4 or 5 times a year, but especially in the spring of the year. When you lived in Bayfield in 1873, there were no railroads out here, there were no roads, just an old trail that went from here to St. Paul, and the rest of it was over the ice or on a boat. Well, anyway, this packet freighter here, the Manistee, would come around the bend at Grants Point, on the other end of Madeline Island, the south end of Madeline Island, and the people in Bayfield would gravitate and go up on the big hillside where there's a huge observatory up there. My dad showed me the spot where that's at. So he said, so that was a big high observatory, and the people in Bayfield would picnic there, and when they saw the Manistee come around through the spring ice in April, they rejoiced for joy. They, is that a good play on words? But anyway, they saw her coming, and there would be fresh potatoes, there would be cattle for the meat markets, there would be apples, there would be, their flour and their grains, and all those type of things, and the people would meet her on the docks in Bayfield. And Lillian Tate, a famous Bayfield person, said when she was a little girl, they would go down to the Manistee, and they had their bands on there. They had all kinds of music on those decks, and they played the bands, and they had a grand time. And when she left, they were sad. Well, she made one final last move out of Bayfield on November 18th, 83, where Captain McKay, it was blowing on northeast gale, it was blowing hard, and then the Manistee was well over 100 feet long, and he decided to himself, so we got to get out of here, we got to get downbound. And downbound for him was from here to Sault Ste. Marie. So he took her out, and the last they heard of her, they figured she made it as far as off of Ontonagon between there and Eagle River, and she took on a lot of water, and 23 of the people that were on her boat at that time are still there. So it's a real sad story, but she was the flagship of Bayfield and was here many, many years. That's a picture of her right down there. And, as she really looked, this is my rendition, which is kind of fun. Any questions? Another passenger freighter, the S.B. Barker. It's one of the great boats in Bayfield. My family told of that boat, coming to Bayfield, and she was here from about 1892 until 1906. She was, at one time, she originally was bought by the Chicago St. Paul, the Wisconsin Central Railway line. They brought her up here, and she was in Ashland, and she would pick up all the people from Bayfield, Washburn, LaPointe, the Mission over there, and bring them back to Ashland, and then from there they would take the Wisconsin Central Railway out of the area, and that way Bayfield people got to, the Chicago, Milwaukee area. So her name was the Barker. She was quite the boat. And there you can see a nice photo of her up there. That's her down at the Booth Dock, right around 1906. She was here from 1883 to she finally was scuttled in 1925. Here's a picture, but I think this is at Carl, I think that's at Gerald Turf over there at Sand Island, where the horse is jumping off the side of the boat. That's the barker, and that's the way they unloaded cattle and horses, and I think that's probably over Sand Island. You see some of the people that are waiting for the horse to get in the water are in the canoe, or in that little skiff. That's the barker. Inter-island transports. This boat is particularly our family. I've got photos of it at home. Well, I come from a commercial fishing family, and I got photos of it at home where it was at our fish camp at Stockton Island and over at Rocky Island too, many, many years ago. So that's the C.W.Turner. Charlie Turner, he came to Bayfield. He was employed by Booth Fisheries for many years. He ran the operation in Bayfield, and old man Booth, Papa Booth, I used to call him, named that particular boat after him. She was originally built for the Hogsted Fish Company in Duluth, and they brought her here in 1910, and she was here until 1937. She did all the island transports. She was at my grandfather's place, my dad's place, all the island fish hops. She would stop and pick up the fish, deliver ice, deliver milk. All the families were on the island back then, and that was her job, and she was here during that period of time. And that's the Turner, and I've got her picture here at South Twinn with the Mildred B. That's my version of the Mildred B anyway. Pure folklore. But anyway, that's the Turner right there as she looked. And as I look at that boat, I can still see my Aunt Martha on the bow of the boat there, because I've got a photo of Martha on the bow of the boat going like this. Okay? The other boat that Booth Fisheries had that was an island hopper was the Apostle Islands. This is a photo of her as she was on the ways down at Manitou, Wisconsin. She came here in '38. She replaced the C.W.Turner, and that's a really nice photo of her on the run. She was a passenger boat. She hauled people, ice, and tourists in the islands also. So there she is, down at Manitou, we're ready to go in the water.
Wood or steel boat?
Pardon?
Wood or steel?
She was all steel. The Turner was all wood. As the other boats, the Barker was all wood, and all the rest of them were all wooden boats.
Where is this one now? Scrapped out?
Yeah, she later was sold in 1958. Booth sold her to Severson's up in Superior, and she sat on the blocks there. She ran from there to Isle Royale and the smelt fishery up there for years. So she was redesignated to do that type of thing. And then the last I saw her, she was a bucket of rust. Nobody took care of her. She had a 75-90 Collenberg in her that went kaboom, 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 kaboom. And you'd see that smoke come out of that stack. You can see her kabooking right there right now. So, and Eli Hendrickson ran it. I remember them, a little kid in there. And I remember the big Coca-Cola vat they had with the Coke, bottles of Coke in there.
When did they go to Isle Royale? What year?
Probably in 1960, somewhere in there. Severson's took it there. There were other boats that went there. Booth had the America that went there. Those type of boats that sunk, but she made that run a little bit later. She was a little bit shorter. I think she was 65 feet long, by about 14 feet wide, drew about 10 feet of water. And Eli Hendrickson ran her for years. Elvis Moe was on her. And Lloyd Wixing, he was the guy that weighed the fish in the boat when my dad would deliver off of his boat at Rocky Island. Right across the dock they'd go, and he would they'd weigh the fish there and get a ticket from them in the island, and they'd go back to Bayfield. So that's the old Apostle Islands. There were log raft pulling tugs. Those were like fish tugs in the area. And the pull tugs, they were steam powered, and they just basically towed the logs that were cut off the hillsides here from the 1870s until 1927, even into the 60s when the last tug that went through here was a John Rome III, and I have a photo of her going through here in 1976. But these are the older tugs. This is the tug Bayfield. She was built in 1909. The Bayfield was built in 1909 by, I just mentioned Marty Peterson here, she's in the back room. Her grandfather was Shine Miller, and he was in cahoots with Henry Wattsmith Sr., who owned the Bayfield Mill in Bayfield at that time, and another guy by the name of Billy Duquette, and they formed the Lake Superior Towing Company. They had her built, and they used her until about 1917, towing logs on the island. But that's a tug Bayfield, and she was like 85 feet long, and you can see a nice photo. That's probably Shine Miller up in the bow of the boat right there. So that's a Pat Laverty photo right there. But that's the Bayfield as I see her pictured in the docks in Bayfield. Remember, it's folk art. It's not very accurate. So she was a beautiful boat, prior to the fleet. The other boat that was popular around here was they call it the Ashland, but she was originally picked up by the Lehigh family in Bayfield. She was brought here in 1899, and she was a wooden boat. She was a tug that pulled for Schrader Lumber Company in Ashland and Bayfield, and she made many trips in the Red Cliff area, the Cornucopia area, as did the Bayfield. They pulled the big rafts out of there, sometimes 10,000 cord on them, in a big log raft behind them, and they take them to the mills. The Ashland was super powered. She was renamed the Ashland by Schrader Lumber Company a little bit later, 1903, I believe it was. But before that, she would come out of Chicago, and like I say, Herb Lehigh family owned her and operated her for a while. The Lehigh family is a big name in Bayfield many, many years ago. So anyway, then there was the combo type of tug. That was a fish tug, harvester, and a barge and raft puller. So you can see that a little bit there. That's the Nellie B. That boat was 1885. That was owned by Nelson and Frank Batan. She came here as Nellie B. They named her the Nellie B. And she was a fish boat and a tugboat, and she was the pride of the Batan fleet. There she is at the docks down in Bayfield at Booth Dock many, many years ago. She was, if you can see the big stack on her there, they were all steamers in them days. Pulled many, many loads, caught many, many, many tons of herring. Then there's this boat, the T.H. Camp. Probably many people here may know about the camp. Anybody know the story of the camp? She was a booth boat. In 1896, her mission was to haul hay to a lumber camp on the north end of Matlin Island. What happened there, it started to blow hard northwest, and she had that hay stacked up in the back, and the boat went broadside like this, and they took water on it. And the weight of that baled hay in the back caused that boat to sink. So she is sunk between here, Wilson Island, and Matlin Island in about 195 feet of water. And she's a National Historic Site on the bottom right now. There's information out there, if you type in the TH Camp, you can see that photo of her sitting on the bottom there. She was a booth boat, but here I got her pictured next to a little Mackinac sailboat, which in that period of time, a lot of the commercial fishing in the area was done by two men in a little sailboat like that, lifting gill nets over the side of the boat. So there she is, next to the Mackinac, and there she is on the run. That's the TH Camp on the run. It looks like she could be up around Redcliffe Point or maybe into Frog Bay. That area is what I'm guessing where she is. So that's the camp.
All passengers lived when she went down?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, there was a young man from Sand Island that was supposed to meet him out there, and he was in one of these little rigs like that. I should have forgot that part of it. He went broadside to them, and they all jumped off on that little Mackinac like that. One guy fell in the lake, but they pulled him in the boat, and they came back to Bayfield and reported her loss to Papa Booth, and life went on. So it's as simple as that, but she's on the bottom now. And that's well documented. All my information is coming out of the old Bayfield presses or the Bayfield County press, so while I might stretch them here a little bit, most of it is 99% down. They told the whole truth with you. You don't know if I'm lying or not, do you? Anyway, fish boats. It's they were basically in my grandpa's time, from 1900 to when they went to the covered boats in the 30s and 40s. They were little open boats, fan-tailed, square stern, many of them. They had a lifter in the bow of the boat. They were popular in Bayfield, Sand Island. A lot of the Sand Island boats were that way. My grandfather's boat was kind of that way. He modernized a little bit. But they, the fish campsites were at Sand, Bear, Rocky, South Twinn, Julian Bay at Stockton Island, and Anderson Point, Stockton Island, and on Medlin Island. So these boats, there are a lot of fishing camps in the islands that I know about that not too many people may know. Anyway, I did this one. This is a photo. This is my grandfather's boat, the Twinn. And I've seen photos of it where it's spelled Twin. And in this one, he had it printed TWNN. So I asked my dad, I said, what the heck was with that? He said, that was just a Norwegian you couldn't spell. So, and the number on this boat, that's the actual number that's on the side of the boat, is used 744. And that's the Twinn. And that's the boat my grandfather fished in until 1935 when he had my other grandfather, who's a boat builder. He built the Best Suzanne. And then my dad, when he came, he bought it from my grandfather. When he came back from World War II, my dad bought the Mermaid, which was the boat that you saw me on as a little kid. Okay? That's kind of the story. But that's the way, those were tough guys. They used to go 10 miles outside of Michigan Island. They'd leave Stockton Island, and my dad said they were an 8-mile-an-hour boat, and they went for 2 hours. And then they picked the buoy up, and they fished all day, set their nets back, and they came home, and then the Turner, or the Apostle Islands, or any of the other fish boats would come to their place at Stockton Island, Julian Bay, pick up the fish, deliver the goods, off they go.
Well, how was the quality of the fish back in those days? Like, people try to ice them a lot, their catch when they pull it up. And, was there ample ice then for that? Or?
Well, they had ample ice because Booth, used to harvest ice out of the lake down here.
Right.
They had a big building, way bigger than this building, and they fill it up every spring with ice. They lay the ice on the bottom, a layer of sawdust, ice on top of that, ice on top of that, so on until it was the height of the building. Then they had a chute inside the building, and they'd run that ice in those big kegs. They were 3 by 5 foot kegs, maybe 2 feet deep, wherever the ice was. And they'd run them down there, and they had a big grinder in there. And, guys would take a chisel and break them in half and throw the chunks in there, wash off the ice, and then they'd, put them in boxes and load them on the boats, and then they would go out to our place at Rocky or South Twinn, Bear Island. Sand Island was a big, big fishing community out there. So off they go. The Turner went east on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and she went west Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. And I got that from my dad. And that's the way the Apostle Islands ran too. So they ran 2 different routes, so that every other day they'd be at a different spot in the islands. Julian Nelson's my dad, by the way. The other type of boat, a little bit later in the 20s and 30s, this is my interpretation of the Turner at Dahlia's at Stockton Island. And a little boat tied up next to her there is the Wallace. And that boat belonged to Chris Tabman, and he later sold it. It was typical of that type of boat in the 30s. So they didn't have these big fishing steel boats like you got if you go down the docks in Bayfield now. they are not, you see these big steel boats, these were steel men in wooden boats in them days. So anyway, that would be the Wallace. There's an interesting story about that, is that in about 1942, where the Booth Fisheries docks used to be, north of there, they used to anchor their boats. There'd be the old swimming beach. Lonnie, Carolyn, you remember where that was. That swimming beach there, where they'd anchor there, and the Wallace broke loose in a big sea and sunk right there. And I think if you had a snorkel and went down about 90 feet of water, just north of town down here, you'd probably see the Wallace on the bottom. Because Clifford hadn't told me, they never ever retrieved her. Excursioners, these boats were kind of cool around here. There was an entrepreneurial group that hit this area for many years. You think the excursion boats nowadays are a new thing? They go back to when Sam Vaughn had a boat called the Evil Wadsworth, was kind of the first boat here. But anyway, a little bit later in Ashland came this boat, the Plowboy. This is kind of a caricature. I kind of like this one. But that's the Plowboy, and she would go between Bayfield and Ashland, Washburn, and pick up people tourist boats. So they were what I call the excursioners. And in 1906, the Plowboy took on water and sunk in the slip where the Coast Guard station is there. So they pumped her out, got everything out of her, got her back running. The guy's name was S.A. Bishop out of Ashland, and he was the proprietor of that line at that point in time. So anyway, they got her running again. She left the area. That's the Plowboy. And a steam yacht. These are just some pleasure crafts that prominent people in the area own. And this is the Stella in the white version of it. And she was owned by Sam Byfield at Sand Island, who had a place named Camp Stella there. And he would run the railroad people that he became officially associated with, and other people to that camp, which is now at Shaw Point on Sand Island, but that's where Camp Stella was. And he would run them from Ashland to Bayfield and out to the island back again. And it was a beautiful little boat. You can see it right there. That's what she looked like, and he was a proud proprietor of her. So that's the Stella, and she ran that route. Well, the Spirit of Sand Island, one of the really, really sad stories. The guys that worked these small open boats like the Spirit here were hard-working Norwegians. The man that owned this boat at the time was named Harold Dahl, and he had a conversation with a Sand Islander named Bert Hill. And as they were working on in the spring of the year, he must have picked it up, and I think it was 1928 is when I read the diary of Bert Hill. And Bert Hill had a conversation with Mr. Dahl, and Mr. Dahl looked at him as he was on the beach and they're painting it, and he said, "This will be my coffin." I've named that, "This will be my coffin," the painting. But so Harold, on his last trip, when he went out that day, and Carl Dahl is here, and that would be Carl's grandfather, and he can probably tell you that story far better than I can. But that was his last trip, and he got out in the ice in the big sea. His engine stalled, and he asked Elvis Moe and Fred. Elvis Moe was in there anyway, and they asked him. He said, "Do you need any help at all, Harold?" And Harold said, "No, I'm okay." But they got back to Bayfield, or back to Sand Island, and Mr. Dahl never showed up again. So that's a sad, sad story. But that's the chances you took when you were fishing in that period of time.
Did they find his boat?
Not to my knowledge did they ever find it. Did they ever find it,
They never
Carl?
found a stick, they never found a buoy, they never found any network gear, they never found any piece of it. My dad walked around with that, he was in the Navy at the time, on his house in Maryland, when he heard about it. When he got back on, he walked all the way around the island several times, just looking for pieces of their work. They never found a piece or anything to do with it.
So,
But it was be like northeast somewhere out there off Sand Island, a mile or so, I suppose.
Yeah, this one kind of a poor rendition of the Sand Island Light and the cliffs that are in front of it. But, and that's, to me, that's Mr. Dull sliding by in the spirit of Sand Island.
The last, they said they saw him when he was bobbing up and down, like he's cranking the engine. He used to have to crank them, he didn't just, I don't think they had a battery on him. And he'd crank and a big flywheel, and you could see him kind of right, but he just apparently didn't get started. And somehow that would take along with the other somehow.
And there's quite a few more stories of boats sunk out in these islands too that a lot of people that I kind of know about that maybe I'll tell you later. Anyway, it's kind of wrapping up here. These are my information sources, so 99% of what I said is true. The other 1% is debatable. Anyway, what we're going to do now is I want to thank you all for being here tonight. It's wonderful to see you. You're a great audience. Right now, we're going to share a little fellowship with one another. There are some goodies and cookies and things like that. A little beer out there. Ham's beer is there. That's for the real professional drinkers. Yeah.
Wilson Island is known as what?
Permit.
Permit?
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, you know, that's available. And then feel free to, on your right, you know, is the gallery. And next to each boat that I've painted is a better history that I've been able to relate right here. Okay? So just take it all in, and there's a lot to see there. So I want to invite you back here sometime. You can bring your families or whatever you want to do and introduce them to some of the great watercraft that floated in and amongst these islands many, many, many years ago. Thank you all. Enjoy.